Hello and welcome to Fintech Insider Focus. I'm Rachel Pandyan, Ventures Product Lead here at 11FS. And in this series, in collaboration with Visa, we're going to shine a light on fintech in different parts of the world. In this half of the series, we're looking closer at Europe. We deep dive into a number of topics which are shaping financial services across the continent. And in each episode, we shine a light on a particular country or region. In this episode, we take a closer look at e-commerce in France. As one of the largest economies in Europe and the seventh largest in the world, you could say they're a pretty big deal. In the past 10 years, France's annual online spend has grown by 186%, making it the third largest European and sixth largest global e-commerce market, while 71% of French shoppers shop based on their brand loyalties, making France the third most brand loyal country in the world. Mobile and social commerce is also a growing trend, where 45% of French 18 to 35-year-olds like to buy directly on social media. So there's a lot to unpack here in this vibrant e-commerce market, particularly when it comes to the customer experience. We want to look at the removal of friction in these experiences and ask how much friction can you take away before you need to put some back in. So this is exactly what we're discussing today. What is the current state of the French e-commerce sector? What are the pain points? What are the use cases? And how can one of the biggest economies in the world continue to provide an effective e-commerce infrastructure for all? To have this conversation, I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of fantastic guests. So firstly, a big hello to my co-host, Lynsey Verrillo, enabler in small business growth at Visa Europe. So great to have you on the podcast, Lynsey. How are you today?
Hi, Rachel. Really well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
No, of course. And do tell our listeners a bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure, absolutely. So part of Visa in Europe, I lead our European efforts to broaden the relationships that Visa has with the payment enabler community. So that includes businesses such as payment gateways, software platforms that are truly enabling access to digital payments for millions of merchants across the world. And I also own the small business agenda for Visa in Europe on the seller side.
Oh, amazing stuff. So plenty to talk about today. We're also delighted to welcome George Owen, CEO of Santos, and our first Fintech Insider guest who's going to take the entire podcast on the move in a taxi. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and what Santos are up to at the moment?
Hi, Rachel. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, even though I am in transit. I'm a lawyer by trade, but then switched to business and discovered the payment world a few years ago, and I am absolutely fascinated by it. What we do at Stancer is quite simple. We are a fully fledged payment service provider that emanated from a big telco group in France. And we have distinctive expertise in credit card and SEPA direct payments in the subscription and recurring businesses space. And we have also launched a dedicated payment service with a target towards small merchants and independents. And I think that's what we will be talking about today.
Yeah, for sure. And last but not least, a big hello to Armand dos Santos, CPTO of PayPlug. Thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the podcast. For those who don't know, can you tell us a little bit more about you and what you do?
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. So as the Chief Product and Technology Officer at PayPlug, which is part of the group BPC. So for the ones who don't know, Group BPC is actually the second largest banking group in France and the leading Visa issuer in continental Europe. I manage product, tech, data, and lead a team of 160 individuals. PayPlug is actually a significant player in the French e-commerce ecosystem. We process tens of billions in transactions per year for over 17,000 merchants, and we collaborate with over 800 partners in France. PayPlug's unique selling proposition is its performance in the French market. So we will probably talk a bit more about that later, but performance means the transaction acceptance rate. And we target French SMEs and global actors who want to optimize acceptance rates in Europe and in particular in France. By the way, Visa and PayPlug have provided jointly with the Group BPC the ticketing payment system for the Paris Olympic and Paralympic Games that will start in a few weeks here. It's nearly already 1 million transactions from over 170 countries that were processed during this ticketing phase. Regarding the PayPlug product, it's an omni-channel product where we focus on merchant experience for seamless and efficient physical and online payments. Just to conclude on my on this introduction, I've been involved personally in 5 different French fintech ventures over the past 15 years. So I'm very glad to discuss the French payments landscape with all of you today.
Oh, brilliant. Well, it's so great to have you. And thank you everyone for joining. Before we jump in, a little bit of a disclaimer, just as a reminder, listeners, that the views or opinions of our panel are their own and don't necessarily reflect those of the companies they are representing. And as always, nothing we say should be taken as tax, financial or legal advice. Please, please, please do your own research. So now we've got that covered, let's jump in. Starting with you, Lynsey, can you give us a little bit of an overview of the e-commerce space in Europe and why this is a market that remains a huge opportunity for disruption and improvement?
Absolutely, Rachel. Thanks. I mean, I think we all saw it during the pandemic. It was really the story, the business, the world changed the way that they engage with commerce, with payments, and it really, truly accelerated e-com in a way that nobody could have anticipated. And actually, since then, we've seen the volume of online transactions reach par with face-to-face transactions for the first time ever. And that is a trend that is not reversing. We are truly in that digital age, and e-commerce is a critical way, and digital payments is a critical way for consumers and businesses to exchange funds. And that growth is not just in the traditional card sector space, which continues to grow, the retail, the product-based space, but actually we're seeing a lot of growth also in the services sector, into B2B. And from my perspective, what I see as a really emerging trend is the increase in embedded everything, really, software platforms that are core to the way that businesses are being run, and they are embedding payments, they're embedding finance in such a way that it's truly seamless in the way that they operate. And that has created yet another acceleration, and where e-com is becoming such a seamless integrated part of the way that they do business. We are truly at a new dawn.
I think it's very interesting that you mentioned COVID, because what we see is that what COVID did, obviously e-commerce was growing and kept growing thanks to COVID, but there's a particular segment of the population, which are the smaller merchants, which usually have, more traditional ways that, it's more difficult to nudge them to change systems. And what COVID did is it really nudged this smaller enterprise segment to go into e-commerce. It's people that usually had, traditional brick and mortar shops, and they had to move to e-commerce. They had to do click and collect. And that's the segment that we're trying to address at Stancer, is to offer them, an omni-channel payment services in order to serve, obviously, their traditional business, which they're used to with proximity payments, but also e-commerce and everything that can include.
It's so true. And I think also to add, on the COVID point, how many people found themselves with more time exploring more hobbies and getting into side hustles? Yes, I might do my 9 to 5, but I also might in my spare time make mugs or pots, or I might get into knitting, and therefore I want to sell my wares, but I don't want to, I'm not a business myself. I just want a way that I can quickly take payment and manage my own little business. And then, Etsy was only met the needs of a small group of those people, and actually using different alternative channels became important. And so I think e-commerce, as the way it's grown, has been a real enabler for those businesses. But this episode, we're trying to focus on the French e-commerce space in particular. And I think, we've got such an international listener base. So I'd love to know, Armand, maybe starting with you, what should our international listeners know about the market in particular and its SME and e-commerce credentials?
Well, what I can share with you is some data from the BPC Digital and Payments Barometer 2024 that reveals key trends on the French market. Actually, France now leads is the continental Europe leader in contactless transactions by amount. It's around 6 out of 10 in-store payments in France, which are made via contactless methods nowadays. And it's not just limited to contactless payments made with cards, because we can also see a 23-fold increase in mobile payments since 2019. So I think that what it shows is that French customers are increasingly comfortable with digital wallets and technology that reduce friction in payment processes, both online and offline. And I think that what we can see and what we can say is that French market is receptive to innovative payment solutions.
Yeah, for sure. George, what have you observed at Stanza? Are there any specific quirks around the French market?
I think I'd say two things. I mean, I'd bounce it. I mean, I 100% agree with what Armand said. The view is I think people are genuinely more and more sophisticated around payments, and I don't know if it's a function of just the evolution and the space that payments are taking, or it's also I think we're at a time where for more sophisticated merchants, I think we're at the end of an IT cycle. And so people are need to upgrade quite substantially, and they've been relying on more, I say, archaic systems. And so they're looking at payments and new ways to do payments. And the reason I'm saying that is, what we do is we also serve larger merchants that are based on subscription-based businesses like telcos. And all that is, it's the same as an e-commerce payment, essentially. It's just slightly more technical. And I feel that at least in France, people are more and more, willing to change, willing to move from an older technology to a new one, and looking for new ways to just make it simpler and more seamless for the end consumer, the payer.
Yeah. And just for some stats on the French market, so the e-commerce sector, products and services combined, generated 159.9 billion euro in revenue in 2023, growing by 10.5% over the previous year. The number of transactions continued to rise by 4.9%, along with the average basket value. So people are spending more money, but only 5.4%, but I think, still an important trend. And I think, there are 60.92 million active internet users in a population of 65.51 million. So it's clear that, the internet is it's a key part of how the market and the consumers are interacting with businesses and services. So we've talked a lot about payments, but really underlying payments is the experience that comes with that. And you talked there, George, a little bit around telcos and that being a little bit more complicated as a product. But cart abandonment rates, so critical in e-com, no matter what your product is, whether it's a subscription, if it's a one-off payment, and it's the biggest indicator of friction and poor UX in e-commerce payments. So what are some of the key pain points that are leading to this? And Lynsey, maybe we start with you here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's been a very consistent observation that we've noticed as we've had that increase in e-com and digital transactions. Unfortunately, I think the performance has not really kept up to pace on the digital space as it has with card present, where we're authenticating in person. So today we see an average of a 10% lower authorization approval rate in a digital transaction versus an in-person transaction. And we also see up to 10 times higher fraud rate. So there are a lot of issues that we need to really address in order to ensure that there's a very great digital UX experience that meets the expectations that consumers and merchants are having in the physical world. And so there's a bunch of user experience challenges as well that are creating problems. We sometimes see 10 screens through the checkout process that are, getting you from purchasing commencement to completion. And, I think there's a stat around it takes on average over 3 minutes to check out a shopping transaction on an e-com transaction in Europe. And consumers aren't necessarily willing to wait that long. I think, we've done a lot of research in this space, and they said 62% of customers will give up after 2 minutes. So, we need to solve the security and fraud. We need to ensure that the tools are in place that protect consumers, that protect the businesses. But we also need to do that with really strong UX. So those are the problems that we're coming together as an industry to solve. And there's a breadth of solutions and tools, and the partnerships that we have with, partners that we have like PayPlug and Santos are absolutely at the forefront of this.
Yeah. And for sure, it's definitely, when we think about some of the high demand products and services that are coming out, Armand, you talked about the Olympics. We're not just talking about people who are going online and trying to buy a single product that there's plenty of stock. We're talking about millions and thousands of people coming onto a website to try and buy a thing at a specific moment in time, and how we make those experiences feel as seamless as it feels to just, check out for your online shopping. I myself put my name in the ring for Taylor Swift tickets. I went day after day to get them, but that was a payments experience at its core, which is wild, because really I was trying to see the Eras tour, but we are where we are. But, what is the impact of this friction and the pain points on merchants? George, maybe if you start here, because I'm sure working in Santos, you must be seeing some of the pain points that your clients have when it comes to delivering these things.
I mean, I think Lynsey addressed the pain points. I think it's more is where the focus is. Obviously, the focus is, I'd say it's twofold. It's the first is to really enhance the seamlessness of the payment process, and that's to shorten it as much as possible. And that comes into direct tension with fraud management and risk management. And so there's an inherent tension between the two. And merchants are more and more in tune that, there is this structural risk that you need to take. It's either you enhance your UX, your UI, and you make it more seamless, and you increase your payment volumes, and you make it easier for consumers to pay. And on the flip side, that risk will go up. But I think that's something that people are taking more and more into account. And I think what people want are solutions that can modulate between the amount of risk that merchants want to take.
For sure. And Armand, from a payments provider perspective, what do you think acquirers or issuers can do to improve this? And I think I'd love to hear as well from, what is the advantage of being a local player perhaps in this space?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, as I already just said, there are a few stages that PSPs or payment service providers can optimize in order to improve performance. At PayPlug, we focus on three main areas: fraud management, payment authentication, and authorization. So I'm sorry, because it might become a bit technical, but
we love technical.
Okay, fine. If we look at fraud management first, I think, like Josh said, it's an ongoing challenge for merchants to mitigate financial risks while seeking frictionless transactions. So so PSPs need to provide tools for the merchants to be able to do the right choices regarding that. And that's why at PayPlug we use an optimized rule engine for fraud prevention and exemption management. And actually the results of this rule engine is that for every acceptance point gained, we can see a 50% reduction in chargeback rate for the merchants. As I said, there is the transaction authentications, obviously. As you probably know, there is a European directive, which is the Payment Services Directive 2, under which the strong authentication is now mandatory for every transaction, unless exemption applies. And PSP must offer transaction risk analysis exemptions to optimize the frictionless journeys. And on this stage as well, at PayPlug, we have developed an authentication product with the BPC issuers, which allows us to achieve 90 to 98% frictionless rate. Just to give you an idea of the impact, it's around it's between 15 and 20% above the market average. And last but not least, at the end of the journey, there is the transaction authorization and the issuing banks who eventually decide if they authorize the transactions or not. And we can also, as PSP, when we act as an acquirer, to improve the level of accepted authorization. And for that, for example, at PayPlug, we can retry automatically on a different route when the transaction has failed on the initial one. And it helps us to save about 5% of initially refused payments. So to answer your question, I would say that by optimizing fraud management, transaction authentication, and authorization, acquirers can significantly improve the e-commerce experience in general and in France in particular.
Yeah. And I think that, the personalization of all these policies is so crucial. Like I worked when I was at Barclays, we're in the high growth segment serving startups and scale ups, and they have such bespoke needs, and you can't just have the blanket policy that you have for specific clients. And that's what these tools have to be able to enable, is that for my business and for my customers, what does it look like? So apart from PayPlug, who's doing this well? So, open question to the group. What are the key use cases, and who's making some strides in this space?
I was just going to say, I'd love to talk about some of the foundational capabilities that Visa's really been investing in over the last number of years. As we've been growing in digital commerce, we've really been investing in the foundational tools across all transactions that can really enable this. And I think there's some really great use cases of where these are being utilized well. I mean, maybe just to give a little bit of background, I think a couple of the tools that have been a real focus. One, network tokenization. So network tokenization is where we're removing the cardholder's sensitive PAN details from the transaction. It's getting stored into a secure token vault as an encrypted credential that is exchanged between the merchant, acquirer, and issuer. It works also really successfully with credential lifecycle management. So it's helping also that UX, because you're ensuring that card details can be updated in the token vault following a lost or stolen card. So there's no disruption to the cardholder or merchant when they're going to, maybe have a renewal of their subscription. That card that they initially put in place might have expired, but through the token vault, they're able to get access to their refreshed details. So that is both protecting the consumer by taking the sensitive PAN details, out of the data. It protects us during data breaches, but it's also really helping the user experience. And the great thing is we've also seen such an uplift in authorization performance as we've been rolling out tokenization across the region. So we've seen a 6 basis point increase in payment approval rates globally, and it can reduce the rate of fraud by up to 60%, providing businesses with much more successful transactions and really giving peace of mind. So, and what we really focus on as the payment network is ensuring that full ecosystem is enabled. And Armand talked about the requirements for issuers and acquirers to really be working together. So we've got over 8,000 issuers now globally enabled for tokenization, and 200 markets empowered with that technology. So you can be confident if you're dealing with a merchant or cardholder across border, across region, as well as locally, domestically, we've got that capability in place as a foundation to protect those sensitive PAN details. And then we've also been investing in a further technology, Click to Pay, which is really trying to close the gap for the guest checkout space, because tokenization is great for card on file, but Click to Pay is really helping us to ensure that we've got a standardized means of transacting when you're coming to a merchant for the first time, leveraging all of that foundational token technology as well, removing that PAN detail, and also importantly, improving the user experience, because there's less sort of steps to go through. I think we've seen some great examples of these rolling out with some of the earlier use cases in Europe. One that I love is in Denmark. We've got a Great Belt Bridge, which is a very high traffic bridge where commuters are traveling in the country, and they have embedded tokenization within their accounts for the people crossing the bridge, so that when they are detected coming through, if they've again lost that card, it doesn't sort of kick them out and create long queues when they're trying to cross the bridge, but really it's helping to improve the customer experience in person as well as behind the scenes with our card credentials.
For sure. And George, you had something to say on this as well?
I was gonna say essentially the same thing. But I think what is interesting for our listeners here is if you look at the massive advantage that Armand has at PayPlug being part of a bigger banking group is obviously that they are the PSP, but they also are the issuer of the card. So they're enabled. They have the capabilities. They have this structural advantage enhance performance at that level. And I think the response that you went through, Lynsey, is a great one, is that the response to that is to tokenize. And that's what enables us, more independent payment service providers that are not attached to a larger acquirer or a larger issuer, is that with tokenization, we are able to really reach that performance. And from my perspective, which comes from more, the subscription-based, tokenization is a massive game changer, because that enables to make recurring payments much more fluid and much more seamless for these businesses that rely on recurring business models.
Yeah. And that will lead us very nicely into part 2. So we're going to take a little pause here, but coming up after this super quick break, we will discuss how to remove friction from payments UX in e-commerce and how this might improve access to services for more vulnerable customers. So don't go anywhere.
Visa's FinTech Fast Track program is streamlining the onboarding process for fintechs, enabling them to gain access to Visa's powerful capabilities and network. Visa and their enablement partners help fintechs launch and scale cards, virtual credentials, and disbursement programs. To learn more, visit partner.visa.com.
Welcome back to Fintech Insider Focus, where we are taking a close look at e-commerce in France. We've touched on the pain points and the main use cases in this space, but I'd love to dive more into the impact this actually has on the merchants and the customers that they're trying to serve. So, George, we were just talking in the break there. I'll go to you first. How can seamless e-commerce solutions and good UX from acquiring and accepting providers help address the issues that we were talking about in part 1, and not just improve business operations for SMEs, but improve the businesses themselves?
It's a big question. I'll answer it.
Sorry, lots of different parts to that one.
Exactly. No, I think there's two things. First, it's from a business operation side, and I think the more the payment service provider is a simple tool on which merchants can rely in order to help them manage their funds. And I think that a lot of what PSPs are doing now is becoming just a better tool within their accounting and their finance departments in order to help them enhance how they manage their business. It's also becoming what we're seeing is that merchants are also using or viewing payments as essentially a data pool that they're going to use and utilize in order to make business decisions, or at least in order to better understand their business and then make business decisions. And there's definitely a trend here on payment data. And it did come from more sophisticated, bigger merchants, but smaller merchants are looking at it because essentially, I think it's the last pool of data that hasn't been overutilized. And it's also a pool of data where we haven't been able to, I think, capture a large amount of the value that is within the payment data. And one of the reasons, obviously, data protection and where the data is stored and how you can use it. But I think that there's definitely a trend on payment data, which merchants own, and there's definitely a will to use that better to better understand their business, make better business decisions, and better understand the consumer.
Lynsey, you are nodding furiously, which the listeners won't be able to see, but I'm guessing you've got things to add.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm gonna kind of go to the small business perspective for a moment, right? Because a lot of my energy is really trying to understand what are the needs of those merchants, so that the work that we're all doing together is making their lives easier. So I hear a lot about their pain points, right? So we know that they're really under pressure, that they're finding it tough to focus on customer acquisition. They're finding it tough to run their businesses. They're finding it tough to comply with the regulation and the tax requirements that they have locally. They're finding it tough to be dealing cross-border and to know what's required in that. They're finding it tough to be able to really understand how can they protect themselves against fraud and ensure that what they're doing is secure and they're growing their business. So it is hard. Now in France, we know that there's 48% of small businesses are using an e-com platform. So we're seeing an adoption of the services that are really in place to help them. And they are beginning to really engage with digital payments, but they also, have a lot of wishes as to how they can improve. So, we asked French small businesses in a survey recently around what was really important for them technically in a payments offering. And that might be helpful. Just a bit of context here, 74% said fraud and security tools were critically important. 78% said same-day settlement. So they also want, payments to be ensuring that their working capital is not affected, and they can also have lending solutions that are going to be helping them to, leverage the trust that they have with their banks, with their payments providers, to help them, move through those periods. So I think our responsibility in the industry is to ensure that we're developing solutions that will absolutely make life easier, but we're really doing that, taking into consideration the complex needs that they have, and then being able to distribute them, because that's the tough thing at the end of the day. There are almost 5 million small businesses in France. Ensuring that we can get this technology, this capability to them in the place where they do business in a way that works for them, that they can understand without maybe having to have the technical knowledge. That's the piece that we're all trying to solve for.
Yeah, for sure. And so turning back to the experience itself now, we talked a little bit at the start around the French market, how the online presence is so huge, how card payments are really, they're a dominant method of payment. So how do we make those online card payments more appealing? I mean, obviously SMEs know that they're important, but how can we make the experience more appealing to both the SMEs and their customers and provide that all around better payments experience, especially in a market historically risk and change averse? So Armand, anything is there something that acquirers can do on their own, or does this has to be all across the board?
Well, I think that it's true that the French market regarding SMEs is there is a risk aversion and limited access to capital. So sometimes it's difficult for SMEs to secure funding for advanced e-commerce solutions. What we can see as well is that because of traditional banking services, the fees can be high and the cost can be high for SMEs. So it can be expensive for them to integrate new payment technologies and upgrade the systems that they could use in order to improve their payment and their e-commerce solutions. So I think that to address these blockers, there is an effort which is required from the whole ecosystem, banks, payment providers, and regulatory bodies, in order to create a context that will make more accessible and affordable digital solutions for SMEs.
George?
Yeah, I wanted to bounce back because you said obviously the SMEs are risk averse and they are, I would say, averse to change. But I would nuance that a little bit. And a lot of people think that in France, people are averse to change. But reality is, if you look at the market, there is a massive push from the user. So if you look at the payment methods and you look at the wallets and you look at the contactless and you look at everything, actually France is massively open to change. And if you look at the penetration of these new method of payments, they're actually very good. And that is pushing the SMEs and the merchants to make change and to adopt new payment methods. And so I think I agree with your statement, but I also think that, the market structure is pushing merchants to change and is pushing payment service providers like us to provide these new ways of payments, and because that's what the consumer wants. And bottom line, they're the ones that are using these credit cards.
Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about all of these solutions and trying to make the payments experience a lot easier. Now, there is a flip side to this, because what we're talking about with enabling payments is we're talking about enabling people to buy, pushing consumerism to a certain extent. Is there a point where we're going a little bit too far with the seamless, I click to pay, you've saved all my details, I can go straight through to checkout? And what is the role of payment service providers to maybe offset some of that risk? Lynsey, I don't know if you've got thoughts on this.
I mean, my personal perspective is I don't think we're going too far. I think this is the right direction of travel. I think we did it face to face with contactless, with, the ability to really embed payments into devices and make them easy to access. I think we're doing the same thing in the digital world. And, reassuring customers by giving them those recognizable brands. I think that's where the Visa brand is super powerful, right? It's trusted. So, being able, that's the benefit of a solution like Click to Pay. They can see that it's supported by Visa, MasterCard, the other schemes. So I don't think so. I think it really is about educating and ensuring that the market understands where these technologies are evolving and how they can utilize that. That's our responsibility. And also just really educating them on the benefits. And I think counteracting some of those risks that Armand and George talked about and the concerns that they have. I think if they were aware around some of the benefits that they could get from moving into a digital space, then they would be really willing to give it a go. And then when they do, I think they will see the results speak them for themselves.
For sure. All right. So last question, and this can be a quick fire round. You've been caught in an elevator and someone says to you, what should this market do first to better embrace the benefits of seamless e-commerce UX? Armand, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. Thank you. I think that first, I think it's important to enhance the digital infrastructure. We need to invest in robust and scalable digital payment solutions and ensure the accessibility of this infrastructure to the SMEs. We also need to promote collaboration between banks, payment providers, and fintech companies to create a supportive ecosystem around that. And I think the regulators have to play a key role as well to develop frameworks that support innovation, while obviously ensuring consumer protection.
Brilliant. George?
Yeah, I mean, I'm unfortunately going to have to reiterate essentially what Armand said because I don't have a better answer than the one he gave. But I would insist on one thing, which is the last part. I think that the payment services being a regulated business, the regulator has a massive role into which way they want to push the market. And I think it's their responsibility, obviously, to protect the consumer, but also to, build the frameworks and build the regulatory frameworks that will enable payment service providers to build and provide new products which are safer, more reliable and easier to use for the end consumer. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's the direction we're going, at least at a European level. I'm quite optimistic.
That's great. Always good. Lynsey, what about you? Are you optimistic too?
Yeah, we have to be optimistic, right? I completely agree with Armand, with George's points. The infrastructure is absolutely foundational in the regulatory environment. So the piece that I'll add is embedding payments, is ensuring that we are embedding payments in the place where the small businesses are running their businesses so that we're not creating yet another layer of complexity for them.
Yeah. And I would like to empower the industry to please make the experience to buy Taylor Swift tickets a lot easier next time because it was
Did you get
stressful.
them, Rachel?
I did get them.
Going?
I'll be going in August, but it took a little part of my soul. That is a good point to wrap up today's discussion. Thank you all so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. For our listeners, where can people find out more about you all? Lynsey, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think probably LinkedIn. Find me under my name, Lynsey Verrillo.
Brilliant. George?
Yep. Same LinkedIn, George Owen, or send me an email at gowen@stanster.com. I'd be more than happy, if you feel like reaching out, be more than happy to answer your questions.
Brilliant. And Armand?
And the same LinkedIn, obviously, that's the best way to have a chat about what we talked today or any other topics that people would like to speak about French market and how people could help us to optimize their acceptance rates in France.
Brilliant. And you can find me, I'm Rachel Pandyan, on LinkedIn or at 11FS. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like what you've heard, follow our podcast and don't forget to leave us a review. It helps us to make it better and helps others to find the show. As always, if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social media, just search for 11FS or Fintech Insider or email podcast@11fs.com. Thank you very much and goodbye.